So I'm with WorldViz. So thank you for having me here. This is fantastic. It's my first in-person presentation in 2 years also, so forgive any sloppiness there. I'm definitely more comfortable with a one-on-one conversation about the solutions we provide. So please feel free to jump in with questions. That's going to help keep me on track. Otherwise, the rambling could start and I could go over. So do we want to admit somebody? I don't know. Got it. Okay. I think this will advance me. So yeah, so the first thing that I wanted to start with, and these can just be rhetorical questions. We can start with one raise of hands. How many of you have experienced an immersive training space? Okay, good. So a portion of you have. That's great. That's a great base for the rest of the conversation. This can go in so many different directions since WorldViz has a lot of experience in VR in general, but today I'm focusing on a product called PRISM, which is an immersive training environment. But some questions just to keep in mind as we go through the slides are, do you feel like you're limited in the space or the equipment that you have, you currently have locally? Is there any limitations that you can think of that the technology we're going to talk about might help overcome? How do you feel about VR technology and simulation? Do you have any bias already? Is there something that you think, an aversion to VR or any immersion, or are you receptive to the idea of incorporating that type of technology into your sim center? And then are you aware of any good examples in VR? And so I'm not just talking about WorldViz products or solutions, but VR in general, immersion in general. Are you aware of any good solutions? Have you incorporated already? I'd like to hear about those if we have time at the end, just so I can have a sense of what's working for you, because we are an adaptive company and dynamic in that we can kind of shift and pivot and incorporate different types of technology into our own solutions. So please think about those things kind of as we go through. And just to kind of give a first impression, I'm going to talk over this video that hopefully is muted, and I'll check that. Well, it is good. That can give an impression of kind of what an immersive training room looks like. So these would be otherwise white walls, and as the subject is walking around, touching the walls, it's changing the environment, right? So we are taking this user to a location that they are not. And at its core, that's kind of the technology that we're going to be talking about is it a convincing way of presenting a background or a context for whatever types of training? I mean, in this case, we're just using visually appealing environments, right? We just want to get across the sense of immersion. What is immersion and how does it feel to be immersed, right? And the answer, hopefully for those of you who have experienced in any immersive environment, is that it within a couple seconds does the job of what, say, a good movie would do in the course of 10 or 20 minutes, or a good book in the course of an hour, right? It takes a while, and then you get wrapped up into that environment. And hopefully an immersive environment takes you there quickly so that you can focus on whatever the procedure, intervention, task at hand might be with an environment that's convincing enough to have to supplement with feelings of stress or support or whatever that environment is intended to deliver. So these are just some fun environments, right? And part of the reason to show you these is that truly you can capture an environment anywhere, because the tool to capture the environment is a 360-degree camera. So it's just this tiny camera. You can either hold it on a selfie stick or put it on a tripod. Take it into any environment that you're interested in, anything that you want to replicate in a virtual environment, if it's a clinical site, a pre-hospital site, truly anywhere, or a relaxation room and you want to do a beach in the Bahamas, go for it. Capture the scene, bring it into your room, and now you can easily and quickly create that environment for you to train within. Advance. All right, so who is WorldViz? Let's take a step back here. We are not a clinical company, we are a technology company, right? So we use immersive technology to enhance the way people create, learn, and collaborate. And as I mentioned on the outset, we are not strictly a projection-based company. We do virtual reality solutions and headsets, and all sorts of different applications for all different industries. So healthcare is a focus right now. So WorldViz is a pioneer in simulation. We've been around for 20+ years at this point, with roots in a collaboration between MIT and UC Santa Barbara. where our original software Wizard was developed and used mostly in psychology experiments, so research applications, where setting controls is a priority, right? Being able to replicate and a scene and pull out data on the back end meant extreme levels of control on the front end, and that's how VR had some early roots in psychology. And I feel like there's some parallels there with what's happening in medicine right now and the ability to kind of draw data on the back end of any type of training that you provide. So with that 20-year history means we've been around for probably longer than any other or most other simulation or VR companies that you might come across, which is, but there are a lot popping up right now because of consumer devices, right? Consumer available head-mounted displays or goggles, right? These types of things are now lower in cost and accessible. And you see all sorts of companies popping up that are providing different types of training applications. So I'm interested to kind of hear how those are working for you guys in a bit. Well, my introduction to simulation and virtual reality was with WorldViz right out of college. So it was one of the first jobs I got. And I worked there for about 5 years, and we did a lot of national and international installations, mostly in engineering and psychology departments, working on research applications and training applications in those areas. And it was a great introduction because I got my hands on all sorts of technology and installed and worked with all different types of clinical applications and research applications and ergonomic studies and really cool stuff. And from there, I kind of took a turn into medical simulation for about 10 years. So I was with a company that did ultrasound education and training, and then with a mannequin provider. And I kind of got my feet wet in medical simulation, what that's all about, how healthcare simulation works, working with residency programs and EMS programs and nursing programs, and kind of every different aspect of that, from civilian to military, VA, national and international. Kind of have a good overview of what's happening in simulation and healthcare, kind of all over the world. And then I rejoined WorldViz because it clicked to me that I had been with a company that had really strong expertise in technology. And then I had been introduced to an industry that seems to be evolving these technologies to fit into healthcare. And I wanted to see if there was a way of improving upon concepts that I'd seen play out at other companies and in other applications. So that brought me back to WorldViz to kind of grow this PRISM concept and see what we can do. So PRISM is an enhanced immersive simulation theater. It's difficult to show you outside of a PRISM theater how it's enhanced, but the idea is you're not just capturing images and videos from the real world, but you're able to then enhance those media by adding support information, adding touch triggers that can pull up additional media files, videos, sounds, instructional guidelines that are in a support document, whatever you want. You can keep certain elements of education within the training environment. So if a good example might be that you are in the middle of some type of a clinical simulation, and something's going terribly wrong, and rather than kind of pack up and head back to a classroom, you could have an embedded trigger because you predicted that something like this might happen early in the education of a particular task. Click the embedded trigger and watch an expert go through that procedure in real time, and then resume your simulation with a little bit more information, right? Or if you forget the steps to a particular procedure, you can pull those up and have access to that while you're in the middle of a particular simulation. So that's those are certain ways of enhancing, and you can take this in any direction you want, since a touch embedded trigger can pull up any media file you choose. Truly, you can come up with creative ways of using that. And then it's an immersive simulation theater. The immersion component, hopefully, get a little bit from the video. And if we have a chance during lunch or after, I have a virtual reality goggle set up in the back where I can give you an experience of what it's like to be in a PRISM theater with those wraparound walls, show you what that feels like. So the goal overall is to evoke a sense of presence in simulation scenarios. And I know that likely this group does a lot of work around that already, creating spaces in your facilities that reflect the real clinical or pre-hospital spaces. And so and I believe that the reason you're doing that is to evoke that sense of presence and have those tools available in one form or another. So that's what PRISM aims to do. And it is, from kind of a what's delivered standpoint, it is a turnkey hardware and software solution. So it's just a plug and play. It's interactive in its use, both through hand controls or touch controls, and also through a control tablet that a control room operator can use. Excuse me. It's dynamic in that your creation of content is fluid, right? Like anybody can do it. Anybody in this room, I have confidence if you can move a file from one folder to another, you can create content within the PRISM authoring tool. And it's built with analytics for debrief. From what I understand, the community is very focused on kind of an evaluation of performance in these environments. And I realize there's a host of tools. I know that even in this room, you've got PTZ cameras everywhere that are capturing simulation as it's performed, and then being able to reflect on how a particular student went through their training. The product offers the ability to add performance markers so that you can kind of contribute to that debrief, and that's just embedded. So for your use cases. No, it's not gonna work. Gotta hit play. So here, this is an installation where I was just testing controls. And so you can see it's as a 360 image. You can rotate how that room is oriented within these three walls. It's a really wide angle, which is really a fisheye perspective. And now we're seeing just, sorry, let me turn off the, okay. So I'm doing some light adjustments. There's ambient lighting that you can play with. This is the control tablet. So an instructor will have this accessible during a simulation and be able to turn on or off any embedded sounds, or pull up different triggers that can be embedded on the screen. And you can have icons that show where these are placed, or you can make them invisible and just a simple wall touch will pull up this type of information. And here showing that you can activate the same content through wall touch. So this is a little bit more clinically relevant content where you have, in this case, it was an urgent care patient room and an urgent care waiting room that I just took the 360 camera, walked in, placed it down, and within a couple minutes, you've got all the, this content that you can work from. So the value that PRISM can bring to an institution is setting up a multi-purpose training room where you now have one room dedicated to, it could be the low volume simulations that you run, so you can't dedicate a full room to it. So if you have a hard time justifying the facilities improvements that would offer you, the perfect OR training site. I know in this institution particularly, I got to see they've got a fantastic one, so that's great. You probably wouldn't use PRISM to recreate something that you can recreate by throwing real devices in the room. But maybe there are simulations that are run less often, or you have the opportunity to do interprofessional education with a local partner, and you want to do the scene of an accident, and then a patient transfer to an ambulance, and then a transfer to an ER to an OR, right? How do you manage those transitions unless you've got all of the equipment, the time, the space, and the facilities built out? Well, you can do that in PRISM with a click of a button, right? You can go from the scene of an accident where you have very few props, maybe just a bicycle laying on the side of a road, and then you essentially move that out of the way, wheel somebody out of the room, come back in, and now you're in the back of an ambulance. And then take it back out, click of a button, now you're in an ER loading dock. So you can kind of recreate that flow and then work in your local partners who would participate in simulation. So that's a fun way of creating a multi-purpose space. And then beyond the PRISM applications or the scenario applications, you're left with an empty room, right? You turn the lights on, turn the projectors off, and you've got a blank room. So throw some desks and chairs in there, you've got an additional classroom. So it doesn't take up any real facility space other than whatever you're using for. It's cost effective, kind of to the same points that I just spoke to. You can, instead of having to buy all of the furnishings of a particular room that may be less frequently used, you can just project those and not just images, right? So this could be, there could be movement. You can actually put some production value behind your scenes and create full scenarios where, a mother or father is crying because their child was hurt on the playground and has a broken arm, right? And you can then kind of create and then replicate that scenario as many times as you want. And then you can scaffold curriculum by building in support information, or you can complicate a scenario by building in hazards or distractions, a dog barking or a siren going off, right? Stressors that increase or change kind of the cognitive load of the participant or the learner. And then ease of use. As I mentioned, anybody in this room can create content in PRISM. It's not limited to computer programmers to be able to get this thing off the ground. And that is kind of a critical piece in the development and the effort we put into the authoring platform. For the instructor, the ability to standardize and kind of scaffold and replicate scenarios offers you more control in providing kind of a continuous education cohort after cohort. Localizing content, I think, is a really big concept that that deserves a mention for sure. If you're training a particular user population or learner group in a local community, exposing them to the local community could be a real value add. A good example could be, if you had limited OR access in the hospital where you do clinical rotations, or if it were a nursing program, for example, that didn't have, that they want OR nurses with experience, but they don't give OR nurses access to the OR, you could recreate the OR in a PRISM room, do an orientation where you talk about which paths you can take walking around a room, where things are located, and improve their ability to function in that space ahead of getting some clinical time in an actual OR. Uh-oh. Can I enable? Yeah. And then again, the creation. What we would never want to do is give an instructor additional tasks that are super cumbersome. So the idea that this is easy to create content really allows instructors to create and share. I should have had create and share, because an organization like SPA, if interested in an idea or a solution like PRISM, would be able to host a marketplace for you to share content, since you'd be able to upload and download content that's created at one facility to share with another facility. It's very simple to create, improve, share, edit, make it work for you. And then through that process, an organization can kind of zero in on what the evidence-based content is that they want to use for training. So iterating on your content is very easy, and that's a real value add for instructors. And then for learners, it's very clear, the immersion, the engagement, and the exposure to potentially hazardous conditions, right? Side of a highway, you can't take your group of learners, if they're an EMS cohort, to the side of a highway or the edge of a cliff, right? So creating these conditions that are either difficult to replicate or hazardous conditions that you couldn't actually physically justify taking a group of learners to, or for exposure, right? So for exposure to conditions that are just difficult to come by. Or you have this one opportunity to capture a really special scene, and you can then do that and then bring it to your group of learners. So here's an attempt that we made at kind of putting this into a graph and kind of the why behind PRISM. And if I fumble with this a little bit, just be patient with me. I'm trying to learn how to talk through this graph that I think can be powerful if used in the right way. So if we think about traditional educational methods for medical education, and you have part task trainers as an example of really low realism, because you practice on task trainers in a very sterile environment, but high environmental control, right? High contextual control. You can replicate what that task trainer is supposed to do over and over again. And on the other far end of that spectrum, clinical rotations take residents into hospitals working with real patients, right? So that's fantastic. And it's very real. But the problem is that one class to the next doesn't get the same experience. You may have a very severe case of something that it has a high impact on one group of learners, and then not be able to replicate that with the next class. And I think that scenario training as a whole really tries to merge the cognitive and skills training with the realism of what you get out of clinical rotations. And that, I think, is the goal of scenario training. So it kind of pushes the curve in the right direction. And what I'm proposing is that virtual options, be it PRISM or otherwise, really try to push that even further, right? Because they offer more contextual control, because you have literally the same virtual backdrop every single time, right? You can kind of zero in on what the most effective background would be, and realism, in terms of localized content that we talked about, in terms of photorealistic content that you're capturing, you're pushing realism in a direction as well. So the goal here is while control and realism may have been at odds in traditional methods of medical education, I think that virtual reality offers kind of the best of both of those worlds in a controlled training environment. So here's just one more clip within our theater showing a little bit of kind of more, well, actually I don't remember what this one shows. Well, more clinical content, right? So showing, bringing up some instructions or types of mask protocol in that case, or a particular patient profile during check-in. You can just think of how you might use this. Maybe add the sounds of a waiting room, beeps going off, whatever it is. You could have whatever's happening behind these curtains. You can add surround sounds. You can bring in more life to the environment and embedded information about kind of what's happening here. And that's kind of the goal. Again, I just wanted you to have one more impression of what a room would feel like if set up with PRISM. So let's move to the next slide. Yeah, so common uses as a background. And I want to stress one more time that PRISM as a background implies something's happening in the foreground. So it is unusual. It's difficult because it's kind of a mixed message. I'm saying, hey, look at this. It's PRISM. But I'm also saying, don't look at this, because what you're really focusing on is what's happening in the room, right? You have a task at hand, and what PRISM is intended to provide is what's happening around you that's increasing stressors or distractions while you're focusing on a task. So while I'm saying look at PRISM, I'm also saying remember that it's a background. And that could be for demonstration, scenario training, skills evaluation, what have you. As a presentation tool, it's like PowerPoint on steroids. I mean, it's a fantastic room that you can add presentation material to. I love doing presentations of PRISM within PRISM because you can touch walls and kind of advance through things. And as a debrief room, we're exploring how this can be really effective to bring people back into the scene and then use the embedded triggers to give a debrief of how it's being used. So thank you. I know I'm probably right at or over time, and I want to make sure that I leave time for questions. And so we'll revisit some of the questions that I started with about how you feel about your existing space, how you feel about VR technology and simulation in general, if you're aware of any good examples of VR and immersive technology. And then through the questions I've added are common use cases that come to mind for your institutions and any other questions about PRISM. And if I have run out of time and I didn't actually track very well here, if you want a presentation for your institution, I'm happy to do an online or on-site kind of demo of what that looks like. And again, I'll be giving some demos in the back. So that's it from me.
If you have questions, I have the microphone. I can come to you.
Yes.
Hi, Bryce. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
So my question to you is usability of the actual software and the hardware. My dissertation was in VR. I've done a lot of work around VR, and what I found is from the software manufacturer to the actual, like if you're getting a Vive or you're getting an Oculus, it appears that they don't talk to each other. So my perception is I have an Oculus at home because I use it to play with zombies.
Okay.
So, but what I'm wanting to do for my learners is to make sure it can identify a patient that deteriorates. And I feel like where is the middle at? Because which hardware is the best? Are you going to tell me to get the Oculus, and are you going to create something that works with that infrastructure? Or are you going to tell me the Vive, and am I going to have problems with that? I think there's a gap between the hardware and the software management side of it.
Okay.
And my question to you is, do you run an Oculus or a Vive, or is it something that you guys created separately?
So none of what I'm presenting, what I'm presenting is projection based. Yeah. So PRISM is currently unrelated to Oculus or Vive or any of the headsets. That said, I'd say 75% of what WorldViz does is VR based and happens in headsets. I'd say about 25% of our business happens with projection-based systems. Now, projection-based systems could be based on different types of software, right? We make a software called Vizr. That's our homegrown original 3D authoring toolkit, right? And that would allow you to connect your projection system to a headset or multiple headsets in different locations in the same location, have some type of coordinated task, but you would be the one authoring that 3D experience. So certainly we can talk to you about what those, what those training applications are. A lot of our experience as a company is helping folks home grow their own VR applications. There is also, I'm trying to start conversations with these companies that are popping up that offer kind of cognitive task trainers in VR, where you're the team lead of some team and you're providing instruction and you're watching these avatars go about essentially completing the tasks that you say. So now we're going to do this, and then they do that, and then they say the next thing is all kind of voice controlled. But what I feel like is missing is the observer group, right? So what about the group of people that have to follow this along on one broken out view from their head-mounted display? And it's just like this dizzying whirlwind experience, and that's kind of ridiculous to me. What we can do, if the software companies want to play nice, they give us those coordinates. We can pop you out into a perspective that gives you the whole room and let you watch them, race around the room, providing those types of feedback. So I've got a couple of meetings set up with developers where I'm trying to push that agenda of saying, hey, let us be the provider of a theater. Let us dual purpose our PRISM theater and say, make this a staging ground for an instructor, for a group of students to follow somebody along and see what they're doing during one of these task trainers. But that's like, that requires them playing nice with us and offering a bit of insight into their software. Yes, sir.
Saying that the same room can be used for multiple applications, the same
Right.
physical room. So if you're saying, you mentioned demonstrating the back of an ambulance, for instance.
Right.
So how do you reach for something that's close to you in the same physical room versus going to the other end of the OR?
That's an important question. I fully understand. When you're dealing with a PRISM theater, you're dealing with the space that you have, right? So we can put these rooms in a room that's 11 by 11 or 30 by 30 or anywhere in between, right? Or even larger if you had a larger room than that. But there's a conversation about what the most practical space is for the applications that you're going to want to train. And in the case of an ambulance, so say you had a typical room, which is probably around 12 or 13 feet by the same, okay? What you would be doing is essentially blowing up that really small space onto these screens that are further away, just as you described. So you wouldn't be necessarily working in the confined, 4-foot high real space of the back of an ambulance. But what you would be able to do is learn the landmarks and learn the orientation of where things are located in that space, right? Because what you can't do in an ambulance is take 10 people into an ambulance at one time, right? So what you could do is blow that image up, because the only way you can do it. It's going to be oversized. It's not going to look to scale, but it is going to offer you the opportunity to say, this is where things are located. This is where you'll find this. This is how you maneuver through the ambulance, even though this is a blown up version. So it is not a substitute for being in a real ambulance, but it offers a unique way to show the orientation, to do a vehicle orientation without having to be, having to try to fit many people in one ambulance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if the scale is not an issue, can it be done on, let's say you take this size screen and put one on either side and create a U shape, can be applied to a 3-screen situation?
Yeah. Technically,
so you can fit
one person.
6 spots of those 3-screen things into one room.
Yeah, but I don't think you're going to find that that's like a cost prohibitive. If it's a space prohibitive problem, then certainly we'll work with you with 3, 60-inch or 70-inch screens. Sure, technology doesn't care about the size of your screens or even the orientation. Really, you can have 2, 3, 4 screens. Our software will work in a one-sided room to 4 sides, right? So that's not an issue. The question is, how practical is it, right? Like, would you have a training benefit from being surrounded by 3 of this size screen? The angle that you'd be able to see is now going to be reduced by the aspect ratio and kind of resolution of these screens. So maybe you'll have better resolution because you're shrinking down, say, a 4K video or 6K video to the size of a 1920 by 1280. But I think you're going to be limited in your field of view and certainly in your movement, right? Now you can't bring a training mannequin inside this space because there's not physically enough room for the 2 of you. So again, it's not intended to be the focal point. It's intended to be the background to your training. But certainly you can. If that was your interest, I'd work with you.
Any other questions at all? Erica, do we have any online questions?
We do not have any online.